Hi, you're watching Bloomberg Quint Live, and I have with me Atul Mehta, Senior Director and Global Head of Telecom, Media, Technology, Venture Capital and Private Equity Funds at the International Financial Corporation. Thanks. Yes, it's a mouthful, Atul. Thank you very much for speaking with us. So what is the IFC's exposure to all of these areas when it comes to India? How much money do you have invested? What do you like? What do you look at? What have the last few years been like?
So we've got about $500 million of investments in that space in India. We've been active for a long time in the private equity fund space, and we've been increasing our activities in the technology space. We're very bullish on India. We're seeing a lot of opportunities. We're seeing a maturing of the venture capital ecosystem as well. So we think there's a lot of potential going forward.
So how much of your money is invested in private equity and venture capital funds, and how much is via direct investments?
It's about half and half.
Half and half,
yeah.
Okay. And you've consciously planned it that way? You want to be, because, when you talk about technology, media, telecom, it's a very, very large sector.
Yes.
And then, before we started this interview, you said you were also looking at other sectors to invest in India. So why not just direct investments?
So if you look at IFC as a whole, globally,
right,
and if you look at our equity portfolio, it's about a third in funds and 2/3 in direct investments.
Okay.
So India is a little bit unusual in that regard, in that we've got a slightly higher proportion in funds for my group. All right. If you look at IFC as a whole in India, we would probably have more direct equity investment because we cover all of the funds.
Okay, fair enough. So what have you liked in the last few years in India in terms of both direct investments and the kinds of private equity venture capital activity that you've invested in?
So first, let me speak about the private equity funds group. All right. There we've seen a maturing. I think India went through an up and down on the private equity fund side. There was significant activity ramping up until about 2007, 2008. And then I think we saw in the last 4 or 5 years some indigestion. Many of the funds that were invested in the 2006, 7, possibly 8 timeframe didn't do as well. But since then, we have seen significant improvement in performance. India's been one of the better performing markets now, more recently, for private equity funds. You've seen more exits.
Yes, we have.
So investors are finally seeing that you can not only get in, but more importantly, you can get out. So we're seeing that maturing. We are also seeing a weeding out among the fund managers. So you're being able to determine the wheat from the chaff. And it becomes easier for investors to say, okay, here is someone who's been through 1 or 2 cycles that we can rely on to produce the sort of returns we'd like.
Okay, and in terms of direct investments, limited to technology, a little bits of media or maybe no media, and somewhat telecom plays?
Yes, so we've historically invested in telecoms, but not recently.
Okay.
You've obviously had a bit of a weeding out in the telecom space as well, and I think we have less of a comparative advantage in the current circumstance than telecoms. In technology, we're quite active. We started off a little bit more in the B2C space. We've done very well in that space. We've got companies like Lenskart, Big Basket. Those are some of our earlier investments. More recently, we've moved a bit more to the B2B space. We've invested in companies like Moglix. We've invested in companies in the transportation space as well. So we are now gradually evolving according to where we see the opportunities arising.
So it's not just TMT?
It's not just TMT.
Okay. Why logistics or transportation? Why
these
education?
are technology companies in this space.
Okay.
Right?
So you're looking at enablers in those spaces,
Absolutely.
not direct service providers.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So it's all technology driven, and these are disruptors, right? So when I talk about the transportation space, we've made an investment in a company called Blackbuck.
Okay.
What it's doing is improving the efficiency of city-to-city transportation. There is a challenge between transporters and the shippers in terms of connecting. You will often have trucks going empty one way and or wasting time looking for a load. And this was done all offline with a lot of middlemen. So Blackbuck is finding a way to allow both sides to connect more efficiently.
Okay.
In the education space, we've invested in a company called Byju's, which you may have heard of.
Yes, of course.
So they are helping parents, in effect, complement what the children study in school to make sure there's effective learning, and they've had very good uptake as well.
It seems that the investment space in India has sort of gone through a structural change. There was a time 10 years ago when we'd hear investors say, we're not comfortable putting large money at play. We're not sure of political or policy stability, let me put it that way, right? We're not sure of exits, and we actually have seen some of those happen in the recent past. We'd like to do buyouts, but we can't do buyouts. Has that changed substantially over the last 5, 7, 8 years?
I think it has been changing quite significantly. So you've certainly seen there was a lot of money that came in the technology space, and then there were a few lean years. And it seems to have picked up again more recently in the last year and a half. We're also seeing government is interested in understanding what the challenges are. So that is, there's still hiccups. I think investors are still concerned about the stability of regulations in this space. But we are seeing greater interest on the part of government to figure out what the concerns are and how can we address them. Most recently, this controversy about angel
tax, yes. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think those are teething problems which hopefully will get addressed as time goes on.
Well, you shrugged that off, quickly, but I think the kind of unnecessary pain that it has caused the investing community back home in India, we've written about it extensively across the media, and there is hope now that the tax aggression will will stall a bit. But just to go back to the previous point, has that helped you scale up the size of your investments, individual investments, at least some of the direct ones? Yes,
I think you've seen a maturing of the ecosystem in India. There was first a lot of money at the very early stages of the ecosystem, but a lot of companies were getting stuck at the next phase, right? Once they proved their concept, they needed to scale, and there wasn't a lot of money for scaling. We've seen that part of the ecosystem gradually filling out. I don't think it's well addressed yet, but you're beginning to see more opportunities. And then there's more money at the later stages, especially overseas money. Once they see companies having scaled to a certain point, they're willing to come in and help scale it up further.
So have your investments, in fact, have you been able to witness in the last few years the ability to invest larger amounts of money in a single investee company versus what you would have been comfortable doing, let's say, 10 years ago? Can you give me any illustrations to that?
No, absolutely. So the way we invest, we try to get in early and then we try to double down. Right, so you'll see that in many of our companies. So some of our earlier investments, Lenskart, Big Basket, the companies we invested in 4 or 5 years ago, we've incrementally added to that. So we've got much larger exposures. We've got 25, 30 million in those type of investments. We're also starting a little bit larger. We're starting with 15, 20 million investments, companies like Blackbuck. We've made those sort of investments to start with. And if the companies are successful, they need more money, we're happy to come in and support them as they grow.
Okay, let me go back to the policy question, Atul. I think angel tax is one. When you speak of big basket, FDI policy for retail comes to mind very quickly. Yes, we've seen some improvement in the stability of policy making over the last decade, but we're not fully there.
No.
I wonder, would the scale of your investments change? Would you be willing to put more money to work in companies like Big Basket if you just had more clarity, less confusion around things like FDI policy? I mean, look at the changes that they've made recently to FDI policy. We've had large investors like Amazon and Walmart, talk to media and say, we were caught unawares. There wasn't even any consultation on this. So what do you make of that?
So look, as far as investors are concerned, stability is key, right? Investors invest on a certain basis, and they would like the goalposts not to be moved, especially the goalposts to be moved against them. There is a recognition all the same that regulators, politicians are juggling multiple constituencies. That doesn't make it any easier to invest. So you've got to try and assess the circumstances under which you're investing. We invest in emerging markets. We see these tensions in many different countries, and we do try to advise governments that stability is the best approach if you want to consistently attract investors.
So have you made any representations to the government both on angel tax and this FDI policy issue?
We do have engagement with the government. We do try to provide our feedback, and they have reached out to us as well for our input.
But it doesn't dramatically change or alter the way you look at India as an investment opportunity. I would think not, because these are policy hiccups and India's a fabulous market to be investing in.
Absolutely. So there are two different factors.
Yeah.
One is the intrinsics of the market and how attractive it is. And then the other is what are some of the other factors which might impact your returns. And you've got to balance both both at. You take a long-term view, you may be able to get over interim policy hiccups.
Okay, fair enough. So what companies are you looking to exit in the next few months or year?
Well, some of the earlier investments will automatically mature and show some exits. Some might exit by virtue of trade sales, depending on the nature of the business they're in. Some might go to the market. So some of our earlier investments are the ones I was mentioning earlier, things like Lenskart, Big Basket. Some of the more recent investments, Blackbuck, Byju's, we're not in a hurry to exit anytime soon.
Okay, fine. So one final question. You listen into all the gloom around here in Davos about the global economy slowing, and does that just make you a happier man, saying maybe if asset values came down a little bit, I'd have more money to put to work?
So again, I personally feel very optimistic because I invest in the digital space. We're seeing huge opportunities, huge potential. I'm hopeful that much of the gloom is short term. You see these cycles. It remains to be seen. From my perspective, I don't think this is going to impact the way the digital economy is taking off.
All right, Atul, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
And have a great rest of your Davos stay. And thanks very much for watching.